But we begin tonight with the spiraling emergency after Hurricane Helene, the mounting death toll, at least 182 lives lost, hundreds still unaccounted for.
Hurricane Helene is close to making landfall tonight in the Florida Panhandle as a dangerous Category 4 storm.
More than 50 people were stranded for hours on the roof of this hospital, engulfed by water.
54 people had been relocated to the roof of the building, and 7 still remain in rescue boats.
On September 27, 2024, Hurricane Helene hit the southeast of the United States, tearing across 6 different states, causing significant damage. It is now the second deadliest hurricane to hit the United States behind Hurricane Katrina, with over 230 confirmed deaths so far. So just a quick disclaimer to both my regular viewers and new viewers to this channel. I typically do travel vlogs and board game related material here on this channel. But this video is an important video, I think, for us to make. It's not here for clicks, it's not here for views, it's not here for anything like that. I just feel like, me and my wife feel like this is a very important video to make, to kind of record the history of what's happened here and have it to look back on in the future when we're just kind of thinking about our lives and the things we've been through in our life, and hopefully for other people to be able to look at this as well and just kind of see the things that have happened and how other people's lives have been affected. So I just wanted to get that disclaimer out there. This isn't for my own personal benefit or something, but I hope this is informative, and I hope it really gives you insight into what's happening. I did jot down some notes to help me get through this video, so if you see me referencing my notes at any point, please forgive me on that. There is a lot to get through on this one. So on Friday the 27th, when everything started, the first thing that happened really once the flooding and everything got bad was the phones and internet in the affected area went out. So we were unable to contact our families, we were unable to get in touch with anyone. Other than the brief amount of things we saw on Facebook and very brief discussions we had with family that morning, we didn't have really any idea what was going on. Me and my wife both had taken off work that day. My wife because her work is in the affected area, and me because I knew that a lot of my people, my family, my friends would be affected by this. And we've had flooding in the past in my hometown of Rome Mountain and surrounding areas. So I wanted to make myself available to those that once the flooding started, if I needed to go and help. Well, not only did the phones and the internet go out, very shortly into it, trees started going down, power lines started going down, and the roads became impassable. There was no way to get there. We had no communication. We had no way of getting there. For those of us who were not in the area but had people there, we were sitting ducks. We were sitting there refreshing Facebook as much as we could, watching the news, trying to get any little scrap of information we possibly could, and nothing was coming out for the most part. We would get little tiny rumors or just little posts from someone who was able to make it out saying the floodwaters were at this person got out, this road is closed. But the actual happenings inside of our hometown, we were basically getting nothing. Nothing was coming out. And then things started to progress outside of our town and started to come into even closer towns to us. Right up the road from Rome Mountain is Hampton, and then right up from that was Elizabethton, which is where mine and my wife's old home used to be. We just moved earlier this year, and we started seeing those areas be affected, and areas that we never thought would see flooding as bad as it was. We started seeing pictures and videos on Facebook and things like that, and we just kept seeing it worse and worse. And our thought process was that if the flooding was getting this bad, this further down the river than it had gotten in the past, then how much worse could it possibly be at home if it's this bad up here? Because Rome Mountain in that area had been affected more in the past than others. And especially with my parents and my grandparents, they live directly on the river. I mean, my parents' back door to the river was probably 20 yards, if that. So we were really concerned about the fact that we weren't getting any news and we couldn't even get there. So we tried to, I guess, reserve our mind to the fact that we don't know anything. We'll go there tomorrow morning because we can't get there now, and we'll just, I guess, see what happened. We finally got some word from family later that evening, saying that people were okay. Basically, we heard from other people that people were okay, but then there was some that we hadn't heard from, such as my wife's mother. We didn't hear from her that entire night. Thankfully, her home and where she lived was far enough into town that we thought that there was no way the flooding could reach her. So we were, of course, worried about her, but we had some, comfort in the fact that we knew that she had the highest likelihood of being okay because she was a further distance from where the flooding would probably hit. So that was kind of the night leading into. Later, we had found out and seen videos that people took on their phones that they later posted. Rome Mountain has a flood alarm at the fire department. And I have never heard it in my entire life. Apparently it has only been installed in the past couple of years is something I heard. Rome Mountain in my lifetime has been flooded probably 3 or 4 times. There was an extremely large one back in 1998 that actually destroyed my parents' home, and there was some fatalities in that one, as well as so much damage caused. It became almost famous in our community as the flood of 98. And just go ahead and give the spoiler here. This flood was much, much, much worse than that one, and it was called a 100-year flood. This flood has been called a 500-year flood, and both of them have happened within 26 years of each other. And the devastation it caused has just been insane. But the flood alarm did sound, and the evacuation started in Rome Mountain. My dad, actually, in their neighborhood, as soon as the flooding started, where they lived right on the river, they knew how bad it was going to get. They've been affected the worst in the past. He started going door to door in his neighborhood, telling people it's time to go, get out, say what you can, just go. And he was able to get a lot of people to leave the neighborhood just by him going door to door and saying it's time to go. So, I'm sure many people are grateful that he was willing to do that. Dad has always been, during the flood times, one of the first in, first out type people. About 7 years ago, we had a much smaller flood that did hit the area, and as soon as it was over, my dad and me later on, when I joined them at that time, were out knee deep or higher in the floodwaters, just trying to start saving what we could. And so my dad has always been very involved in this kind of thing and making sure people are okay. So that was kind of the lead up to everything. Most of it was just us in the dark and just waiting till the next morning to go up and figure out what happened, who's okay, how bad is it. And so we went to bed that night. I know Lauren got very little sleep. She was very worried about specifically her mom, because she was the only one in Rome Mountain that we had not really heard from yet. So she was very worried about that, but we got up and the next morning we headed out. Before we get to the following morning when we headed to Rome Mountain, one of the things that we were seeing throughout the day of the flood happening on Friday is the news reports. And something that we saw in the news that was absolutely devastating was the town of Unicoi here in East Tennessee, which also is where my wife works, which is the reason she didn't go to work that day, is because they knew it was going to kind of get like this. It flooded probably the worst in East Tennessee. I don't want to discount anyone else's, suffering or any devastation that they saw, but Unicoi got hit extremely hard. A couple of stories that came out about Unicoi actually hit CNN. Multiple stories have been on CNN about Unicoi and the things that have happened there. One of them is that the hospital in Unicoi, when everything got bad, they evacuated the patients from the hospital. Well, by the time they had gotten the patients evacuated, the staff were still there, and it was too late for them to evacuate. So the staff of about 50-ish people, I've heard 48, 52, so about 50-ish people, ended up having to go to the roof, and the water was near the rooftops, and they had no way of escape or getting out, so they were all stuck on the roof. What ended up happening was helicopters ended up having to air evacuate them out. And that was all over the news, was the helicopters going back and forth, evacuating people off of this rooftop. So for us, that was terrifying again, to see Unicoi going through this and people being airlifted off of roofs of hospitals. And again, at this point, still not hearing from a lot of our friends and family and things like that. Another story that has hit CNN, and there are still details coming out about this one. So I want to preface everything I'm about to say about this story with, allegedly. There are still disputes over what's happened in this situation, so I don't want to cast aspersions or give my input on it until all the evidence comes out later. But one of the stories that's come out is about Impact Plastics. It is a factory that was very near the hospital, so as you can imagine, it got hit extremely hard. The story that's coming out allegedly is that when things started getting bad, the workers there asked management, can we go home? And what we've heard is that management told the workers, no, you can't leave. If you leave, you will be fired. Okay, so they continue to work. Apparently, again, allegedly, management then went home and left the workers there. Management is claiming that they did not go home, that they were still there as well. The investigation is still pending, but that's what happened. Well, the end story to this is eventually it got bad enough that even when the workers were getting ready to head out anyway, it was too late and they couldn't escape, and they had to also seek refuge from the waters that were rapidly rising as it also hit the hospital not very far away. Supposedly, it was 11 workers that were left behind in the end. 5 of them were able to get onto, well, they were in the water, but they were able to grab onto something, be in a safe-ish area to the point that they were able to at least grab onto something and float. But these 5 people remained in the water for at least 3 hours waiting on rescue, holding onto something with the waters rushing against them and just floating there for 3 hours. This one we can confirm personally. Lauren knows one of the 5 people that was in the water. So we have pretty much heard it firsthand that this happened to this person and these other 4 people. And they just sat there for 3 hours waiting for rescue in the water. Well, I said there was 11. The 6 other people, unfortunately, were not able to get to refuge. They were not able to get a hold of anything, and they were swept away in the waters. 5 of them have now been found and confirmed that they have died, and there is 1 still missing, and I'm sure that family is hopeful, but with it's been over a week at this point, this long, it is very much likely that that person has also perished and that they are just looking for their body at this point. Obviously, we hope they're found, but the optimism is low on that one. So that, again, is alleged. The 5 people in the water, we can confirm from someone we know. The 6 people that were swept away are confirmed. The allegedness is about whether or not management told them to stay, whether or not management stayed themselves. That is the investigation that's pending, but that is the story that we have heard so far. Also in Unicoi, the interstate that me and Lauren have driven many, many times over to see family, to go on vacation, it was completely submerged in water. Seeing that image on the news was one of the wildest things to me, because that was an area that I never would have assumed could flood. I didn't think it was possible, so to see that image was pretty shocking for us. So I just wanted to cover the stories that came out of Unicoi. It did get national coverage, multiple of them, and a lot of people who are seeing East Tennessee get hit, all over the place, that's the only story they're seeing. So now I want to get into more of the rest of us that have been hit with it and kind of give you my own experience and story as we've gone through this. So the following morning on Saturday, me and Lauren left the house and we didn't know what to expect, and we started heading towards Rome Mountain. Well, as we got closer and closer, we started to see the things that had happened. The first thing we saw was trees down, and you could tell by the trees that were in the road that whether it be rescue workers or first responders or just people trying to escape. We do live in East Tennessee. Everyone up here, for the most part, they've got chainsaws, they've got ATVs, they have the means to take care of themselves, if that makes sense. So whoever it had been, we started seeing chopped up trees that had clearly fallen on the road and had been cut with a chainsaw to clear the road and make way for people to drive. Whether it was coming or going, who knows, but we did see that because that was part of the roads that were down the previous night that prevented us from getting to Rome Mountain. So we started seeing trees down, and then the next thing we saw were power lines and power poles, whatever. They were down. There were power lines on the road. The previous night, one of the things we had heard is that there were so many live wires laying in roads that people couldn't pass through because there were live wires. The wires were not live at this point. However, they were still laying in the road. So to get there, we had to drive over quite a few wires laying on the ground. There were power poles either laying down, broken, laying down, leaning over across the road. I can't tell you the number of power poles that we literally had to drive under that had trees still laying on the lines, that one snap and that tree could come down on someone. The number of lines that were being held up, barely swinging over top of the road, that you just had to drive directly under them. That was one of the first things we saw as we were driving into town, and we saw a lot of that. That really blew my mind as well. And this was pretty far away at this point, so we still had about 30 more minutes to drive to get to where we were going. Something else that started happening was we started seeing air traffic. There were helicopters everywhere, and it has been that way for over a week now. Literally in my home in Johnson City, which is almost an hour's drive from my parents' home in Rome Mountain, we are still seeing helicopters over top of us constantly. I'm seeing them in groups of 4 or 5. We're seeing carriers. We're not just seeing helicopters. We're seeing all types of stuff flying over top of us. Black Hawks, everything you can imagine. So just chopper after chopper after chopper is constantly going in and out. So the air traffic has also been really insane with this. The first place we went when we got to Rome Mountain, as we entered Rome Mountain, we started seeing the devastation. We started seeing the mud. We started seeing where the water had been on buildings, because you could see the water lines. We could see people's homes washed out with furniture in the yard. We could see homes completely leaning, walls crashed in. There were fields going into town that were sunken down near the river that you could see where the river had completely gone all the way up on them, and it was just mud and rocks pushed all the way up into it. And the houses that sat lower below, like the bridge lines, we could tell just by driving by that the water had gotten completely into their homes. Who knows how high inside their homes, but just driving by, you could tell it happened. The roads, for the most part, you could tell had been cleared so that it was passable. But it was really just on the sides because they'd worked on the roads because they needed to get that done for emergency personnel and for people to come in. So everything had kind of been pushed to the side, but we could just see the devastation as we drove in. But the first place we went was to Lauren's mom's house because, like I said, she's the one we had not heard from. We got there, she was safe, she was okay, just like we thought, but Lauren being able to actually see her, put hands on her, speak to her was a big deal. So we stayed with her for just a little bit, made sure she was okay, and then it was time to head to my parents' house, and that's where everything really got real for us. It was seeing my parents' home because her mom's house had been unaffected, her mom had been unaffected. Her dad's house is up in the mountains, so other than losing power and a tree or two going down on his road, he was relatively unaffected. Now, obviously, power going out is a big deal. Lauren's mom also lost power for a while, so obviously that's a big deal. Thankfully, they were able to get power restored to her mom's eventually. Her dad, over a week later, just got power back, but he had a generator during this time, so he was able to keep things going there. So those two were relatively okay. So a lot of the focus really turned to my parents as they got a lot of the devastation. So going up to my parents' house, as we made the drive in, what people call the village of Rome Mountain, which is kind of the center where more of the I guess the homes were tied together. It's more of your normal neighborhood, I guess you'd say. It's where the gas stations and everything like that are. That's what got hit the hardest because the river goes right in between everything there. We saw one of my parents' neighbors up the road. The front part of their home had completely been pushed out, and the wall was at a complete angle, and you could see directly into their home through the cracks of where this wall was angled. It was definitely not safe to go in, but we did see the people in there going to retrieve their lives, going to retrieve what bit of stuff could possibly have survived out of there. We saw that the apartment buildings out on the main road had completely washed out, that the businesses there had completely been filled with water and mud. There were fences down, there was rocks and mud everywhere. And then we drove up to my parents' house. As we drove up to my parents' house, the first thing I noticed was that their road was completely gone. The asphalt and the concrete, whatever it is, had completely been demolished. It was laid all over the place. It was cracked. It was raised. It was lifted, and there was no road past a certain point. It was just completely gone. So that was the first thing I noticed. Then, as you're coming down my parents' road, the very first thing you can see up the road is their garage. Their garage, I could tell the garage doors had been blown off. What had happened was, go ahead and get into the garage, is that the back of the garage was facing the river. The river ended up punching a hole through the back of the garage, pushing all the water directly into it, bursting through the two garage doors, blowing them off. Everything in the garage got wiped out completely into the yard or up the river or just gone entirely. My dad's Mustang had been in that garage. It got pushed out of the garage into their front yard on top of a tree, leaned against another tree, and nose down in the water and in the mud and dirt and everything. So the Mustang was dead in the middle of their yard on top of a tree. My dad's Harley was in that garage, and it had gotten basically ruined. And to give a number here, to give you guys an idea, my dad had somewhere around $30,000 worth of tools and machinery in his garage that he collected and bought over the course of 30 plus years, buying this stuff slowly over time. He used a lot of it at his job. All of that had gotten completely blown out, and we have been slowly collecting it from the yard. We'll get to that in a second, but even the stuff we've recovered is ruined. Pretty much all of it is gone. So that was the garage. The other thing is, sitting beside that garage, my parents had recently, in the past year to year and a half, purchased another building from their neighbor where they stored their camper and where they had been working on a workshop. It was a completely other building. We noticed that building was not there. It was completely gone. Zero trace of it. It was like it was never there. And then as we started the cleanup, we found the pieces basically all over the place and piled them in the center of the yard because the building was completely destroyed. The foundation of the building ended up getting lifted out and broken apart, and the foundation of that building was laying across their driveway, what used to be their driveway, and in their yard and all over the neighborhood. So that building, it's almost like it never existed. Their pool around back, their deck got completely wrecked by the water. The pool was emptied for the season, and it actually had filled up with the rainwater and with the flooding water, so the pool was sitting completely full, but everything around it was wrecked. The pool was basically smashed in as well, so it was also wrecked. Pretty much all of that was gone. My parents' house, it was lifted because like I said, the flood of 98, all those years ago, we used to live in a trailer that sat right where my parents' home currently is, and in the flood of 98, that trailer got washed away, and at that point, me and my family, I was a baby at the time, became homeless. And when they rebuilt the house in that spot, they lifted the house, hoping to avoid something like this in the future. Well, at the time of getting there, my parents were optimistic that the water had not affected the inside of their home. Well, over the course of this last week, they have gotten under the house, they've, inspected more, and they have found out that it did get underneath and soak through into most of their flooring. So I don't want to give a number, but a good portion of the flooring in their home is going to have to be completely replaced. All of the bracing and things underneath the floorboards are also going to need to be replaced, so there's a lot of work to be done there as well. So even though originally we thought the home itself was relatively unaffected, we've later found out that it was pretty heavily affected as far as having to replace a lot of flooring and expensive things. That's also going to cause a burden and a toll on them. But the pure devastation of it, and seeing this yourself, seeing the waters, what they'd done, was really insane. Seeing my dad's toolboxes literally half buried in the mud, sticking out when you pull open a drawer full of mud, full of everything, and seeing the look on my parents' faces and our families and the people in the surrounding neighborhoods as everyone was just lost. No one knew what to do. Everyone was in pretty much a state of shock and just kind of unable to comprehend what had really happened to them and try to start to piece things back together. After seeing all of this with my parents' house and, you know, their garage and their side building and their pool and their home and then the rest of the neighborhood, like I talked about, the next thing we saw was right next door to my parents lived my grandparents. They lived right next door my entire life. They've been in that house for, I'm going to get this wrong, like 50 years. It's a long time. And what we found out was that the house is ruined. Pretty much from the ground up, it's ruined. Their house was not raised the way my parents were. It was further inland, so the flood of 98 and the other floods that have happened were not able to reach them. But this one, being as bad as it was, did reach them, and it got entirely in their home. We could see the water line, how high it reached up the home. The home is full of mud. Things are destroyed. Their garage was ruined. Their vehicles were ruined. My papa had a truck in his garage that he's going to try and save, but who knows if he'll be able to. But my mama and papa essentially lost their home. We talked about it. In a world where it was my home as a 29-year-old, could you start to salvage it and fix it and maybe start to get it back to what it was? Maybe. It's one of those things that you would really have to assess the damage and find out if it was worth it for you to put the work into it. My grandparents are over 70 years old. They're at that point in life where they can't do that kind of thing. They are going to have to move on. They can't dedicate X amount of time to fixing up this home and dealing with that when they're at the age they are, they're in the health they are. There's a lot of things that go into that they may or may not just be able to do. So for someone in their situation, it's not something that's feasible for them to do. So essentially, they've lost their home. They do thankfully have somewhere to stay. My papa's brother owns a house up the road that was not unaffected. It got hit as well, but the inside of the main living area didn't get affected, so they are able to stay there even though that home also needs repair and also needs cleaning up. They do have somewhere to stay for the meantime, at least, while they figure out what they're going to do moving forwards. Seeing my parents' home in the state it was, seeing the neighborhood in the state it was, seeing my grandparents essentially lose their home, seeing everyone in a state of shock, and most people just not knowing what to do or where to go was pretty much what that first day looked like. We got right on it with cleanup. The moment we got there, we got into it. I was in knee-deep mud the entire day. We were trying to dig up whatever tools of my dad's we could in the mud so that he could show it to insurance and try to get whatever money he could back. We've starting to deal with that process still, but we got to work right away. So let's talk about what the cleanup process looked like, which has pretty much been the entirety of the past week for us. All right, so with cleanup, day one, my dad and Lauren's dad got on the tractors and they tried to salvage as much of the creating a driveway and a working area as they could, taking the dirt and mud and whatever there was and packing it down in front of their home so that they could get in and out and try to get trucks and the track hoes and the tractors through there. There was a giant hole in front of the garage where the water had not only burst through the back, but it had burst underneath, washed out the foundation, and created a giant hole underneath the garage as well, making a hole right in front of the entrance to the garage, so getting in and out was very difficult. They actually ended up picking up the foundation of that side building I talked about and placing it in front of their garage as a makeshift parking space at the garage. A couple of days later, this is like 4 days later, we were actually finally able to get my dad's Mustang off of that tree. The tree pulled out from under it. The tree that it was leaning on ripped out of the ground, and we were able to push and pull with the track hoe and with all of us the Mustang out of the yard and onto this little parking landing that we created with the foundation of the other building. But that's what we did day one, was pack down all the mud into an area to work, basically. get the foundation so that we could have that little parking area that we knew we'd eventually use for the Mustang. And then we just started digging things out of the mud. We started finding tools, we started finding belongings, and just trying to dig up every single piece of whatever we could out of the mud. And then to get into my grandparents' home, the mud, like I said, everywhere was at least halfway up your leg. But my grandparents' garage, it was completely packed full of mud, and getting in and out of there to get into their home, as the main entrance to their home was basically completely destroyed, so we had to go through the garage. Me and my papa ended up literally taking crowbars and breaking the garage door off and throwing it out into the yard to be thrown away so that we could even go into the garage. And then once we got in there, we had to wade through the mud, and I ended up spending a good portion of that day just shoveling out the mud just to create a walkway into their home. That was a lot of day one, was shoveling mud, pulling materials out of the mud and the yard, and walking around the neighborhood and taking care of what we could. And then the tractors have not stopped in that neighborhood all day doing something, or all week they've not stopped. But going through the mud, it wasn't just mud. Everywhere we ended up going, it was mud and sewage. You could smell it everywhere, and you just walk through it. There's nothing else you could do. You've got to start to reclaim your lives, reclaim your materials and what you could. So it was mud and sewage. That side building, like I said, we ended up placing it that same day into the middle of the yard so that all of the large debris from it was at least in one common area, so that it wasn't in the way of everything else we were doing, because it was sprawled out everywhere. And that was day one. Well, when we left my parents' house, not to get into it too much with their story, as I'll talk more about my immediate family because this is their story to tell. When we left my parents' home, my best friend Lucas, who you have seen in my videos, who you've seen across this channel, him and our other friend Trinity, they lived, like I said, in Hampton up the street, which also got affected. I knew they were safe because I'd reached out to them the day it all started. They were on a trip for Lucas's work, so I knew they were not home. I knew they were at least safe. When we left my parents, we headed to their home to see what happened there. When we arrived, both of them lived in apartments in the same apartment complex, and both of them were essentially completely destroyed. The devastation there, I think because of how it hit and how hard it hit them specifically, that one almost hit me harder just because it was kind of still ongoing. It was raining there, it was coming down. They were actively in the process of discovering it because they had just gotten there and discovered the state of their own, living space maybe an hour before we got there, maybe 2. So they were still in the process of the shock of it. Whereas my parents and family and grandparents kind of went through it the day before. So the following day, of course, while they were still upset and they were still in shock and there was still a lot going on, they had gone from, a 10 upset, even just down to a 9. Just that little point down made it, that slightly bit easier to swallow. Whereas when I got there, they had literally just discovered it, and we just started getting what we could out there. And Hampton has a higher population than Roan Mountain does, and it's also closer to the main populated areas, so first responders and things are able to get there better. So the entire town was insane. People were going everywhere. It felt like a true disaster area, whereas Roan Mountain, when we got there, felt like post-disaster cleanup. Like the disaster was over, now we start the cleanup. When we got to Hampton, it still felt like a disaster area. Like things were still happening. People were frantic, people were going everywhere. And then going there and seeing 2 of my best friends in this world, what they were going through, it really broke my heart because as they were going through it actively, you want to help and do all you can. So that's what we did. A bunch of our other friends came as well, and we immediately just jumped onto it and just jumped into action. I don't want to get too much into it. Like I said, it's their story to tell. But the key takeaway was how heartbreaking it was, and that they were still actively going through it at the time. So seeing that was very difficult for me, and them going through it, I couldn't even imagine, how they felt. As difficult it was on me, it was 100 times worse for them as they were discovering it. So that really hit me and affected me to see them in that state. The very next day, because that was Saturday, the very next day, we went back to and this is pretty much how every day has gone since then. We went back to Mom and Dad's in the morning, and we did everything we could. We kept cleaning up, and it was a lot more of the same. It was shoveling mud, it was pulling things out of the mud, and this is Sunday at this point, pulling things out of the mud. We were still just recovering their lives as much as we could. We were fixing the surrounding area as much as we could, cleaning up asphalt, cleaning up rocks, packing down mud, creating ways to get into certain areas. That was a lot of Sunday. And as soon as I left there on Sunday, I headed to Lucas and Trinity's, and we worked there, and we pulled their things out of their homes, and we got as much of it as we could out, because they did lose their homes. Just throwing it out there. They are actually staying with me right now. I'm going to include a link in the description to a way to help them financially if you want to, help any way you can. That will be in the description. And we started pulling out their stuff, and we started working there, getting it back to my house, getting it in the garage and things like that. And that's how we spent our evening, was doing that. So that's what Sunday looked like. It was just more of the same. It was getting stuff from their place. It was helping Mom and Dad with theirs, and it was just over and over and over, just doing the same stuff, shoveling mud, doing all that stuff. And then Monday came. Monday was a hard day for me, specifically for me. Everyone else, and I want to preface this when I say, I'm giving you my own personal experience. There are so many other people who went through far worse than I could possibly imagine, so I don't want anyone to feel like I'm complaining or I'm putting, woe is me, everyone else, they had it far worse. I'm just giving you my personal experience as we go through this. Monday was a difficult day for me because, context here, I'm in retail management. This week coming up, if you know anything about retail, it was the week of my inventory. That's my biggest day of the year of my job. It is our Super Bowl. It's what we prep for months for. It was on Wednesday. Well, on Monday, we got up, and that morning I got to work on whatever I could to help with the disaster relief. We went to Lowe's. They were giving out disaster relief buckets that had materials in it, gloves, masks, sanitizer, things like that. We loaded up Lauren's car with those buckets so that she could take them to our people all over town, and we loaded up some extra so that we could take to neighbors and friends and people that we also knew had been affected, because at this point people had started getting their stuff onto Facebook, and we were starting to see the devastation that hit people we know and areas that we know, and we were just trying to help whoever we could. My parents' neighbors, we helped them through this whole process as much as we could, whether it be helping them clean out, certain pieces from their home, helping them with the tractors and tracos, because like I said, not everyone's fortunate enough to have those the way we did. We went out and helped a person I went to high school with and helped them clean out, pull their fridge out because it had been stuck into their kitchen by the swelling of their home, so that the fridge could not be removed, and they needed it removed to get in behind it and all this. So we ended up yanking that out. We ended up helping them clear debris, going around the neighborhood, helping who we could. But Monday, after we left Lowe's, we went over to Tractor Supply. They have tote boxes for people who can pack up their things. Because a lot of people think during the disaster, they're like, we need water, we need medical supplies, we need all this, right? That is entirely true. Every bit of that is true. Something that people don't think about is things like boxes and totes. These people are pulling their lives out of the mud, and they need somewhere to put the stuff they pull out. So we went to get boxes from Tractor Supply, and we loaded all this in Lauren's car. Well, I had no way around it. I tried. I ended up having to go to work Monday night. I, in Lowe's parking lot, broke down and just started crying. And I was upset because I had to go and do something as trivial and stupid as go to work at my retail job when there were people that needed me. People needed me there to help, and that really affected me that I couldn't be there to help them. So I just broke down there, and I was supposed to work the next 2 days so that I could prepare for my inventory, and then Wednesday was supposed to be the inventory. I just got on the phone and talked to every single person from my job and my boss and my bosses and people like that I could, and I was like, I can't do it. I need someone to do it for me. People need me. And thankfully they were able to work with me so that I could get the rest of the week off so that I could be there to help the people but I still had to work that Monday night, and I drove there. I pretty much cried the whole way. When I got to work in the aisles of my retail store, I literally cried in the aisles 2 times that night and just couldn't hold it together. And I was just so upset that people that needed me, I couldn't be there to help them. So Monday was difficult for me as people continued to work to, regain the things they'd lost and work to see what they could do. And I had to do something as stupid as go to my retail job. So that night affected me. And for this next week, we pretty much just cleaned up and did more of the same. I'm out there with a sledgehammer, busting up asphalt. We're loading it into the tractor and then hauling it off and piling it. We're piling up all the debris. We're piling up the mud and dirt. We're raking the yards. We're going around the neighborhood and we're helping everyone that we can. Because I told my parents the more and more that we got into their cleanup, I was like, there are other people who need help. So that's when we started trying to go to as many other people as we could who we thought could use the help and help them, because there was just so many other people that needed help. So we helped them as much as we could. Then we tried to go help as many other people as we possibly could. And it was literally from sun up to sundown every day, getting home every night and just being covered in mud and dirt and clothes being disgusting, shoes being ruined, getting in the shower and just watching the water turn brown as it goes down the drain and just starts to clog up, and then have to clean out the drain so that you can continue to shower as it's just mud and dirt and it just keeps going. And that's every single night for over a week. And just, spending your days dehydrated because you're working so hard and sweating so much that you forget to even drink water. So spending your days dehydrated and just trying to do everything you can every second of every day was the next week of our lives. And it's still ongoing, but things are getting better now. All right, so with cleanup still ongoing, but being where it is, I want to talk about something else, and that is the help that was provided throughout this process. Obviously, me and Lauren tried to do all we could for our people, but something that shocked us throughout this entire thing, and I'm sure, who knows, these services such as Red Cross and FEMA were hopefully helping in these other 5 states that had been affected, because Tennessee was at the tail end of this, so we were basically the last ones hit. Throughout this whole thing, we did not see these services. We did not see FEMA. We only saw Red Cross one time, and the one time we saw them, it was not a positive experience. We have heard from multiple other people similar stories that it was not a positive experience, and we basically felt like we were receiving no help. The limited emergency responders that there were, they were stretched as thin as possible because they were trying to do what they could, but there was just too many people to help for these limited number of emergency responders who could go and do things. So they were obviously trying to help, but these large organizations that are meant to come in for disaster relief, I want to hope that they were just out helping other people and there just wasn't enough of them, but I don't know if that's true or not. I don't want to speak to it. All I know is that we didn't see them. So that was very discouraging. I heard people throughout the entire week complaining about that, how they felt like they weren't getting the help they needed from these larger organizations. However, because of the area we live in, I'm sure a lot of other areas are like this, but in East Tennessee, like I said, people got tractors, people have large machinery, we have farmers, everyone's got a chainsaw, everyone's got, we are a people of means is the best way to put it. Everyone who had anything jumped into action. People were obviously focused on cleaning up their own lives, but the moment either their own lives were cleaned up or were at least stable, they immediately went out into town and started helping as many people as they could. Rome Mountain, where it's so spread out, there's really the village, and then everyone else lives up in the hollers and the mountain path and roads up in the mountains and things like that. A lot of these people weren't able to get down to the town to help, but the ones in town, such as me, my parents, and our neighbors who did have this equipment, tried to help as many people as we could. However, Hampton, where Lucas Trinity lived right up the road from us, I do want to say that community we saw a lot of the neighborhood jump into action. There were people driving around on side-by-sides delivering food that they clearly cooked at their home. They were just hamburgers and stuff that they were clearly going around passing out. We saw bulldozers, we saw tractors, we saw pretty much 10 times more in Hampton than we saw in Rome Mountain, so those people really jumped into action. Rome Mountain did, but in a smaller degree because it's kind of more spread out. I don't want to blame the people when it's just more spread out, whereas Hampton is much more, collected. Whereas we felt like a lot of the emergency responders, things like that, were taking care of Elizabethton because it is a larger town. One of the main bridges in Elizabethton did end up getting severely damaged, and that bridge, I think it's back up now. I actually don't even know the answer to that a week later, but it was unpassable, so people were having to take alternate routes to even get where they needed to go. But also something that was devastating that happened in Hampton is their high school is completely destroyed. It will need tore down and completely rebuilt back up. It was completely and utterly destroyed. So that was another thing that happened in Hampton, but the crux of that was people jumped into action as much as they could. Lauren had actually posted on Facebook saying that we need help, that people up there need help, and basically just trying to get people to go there as best we could and let people know about what's happened. Well, we were at my parents' house, and a guy just shows up, and he's like, hey, I saw her post on Facebook. I run a construction company. How can I help? And we were like, oh, that's awesome. But at this point, the internet and things were still at Rome Mountain, so we didn't know how he got to us. What ended up happening was he came to Rome Mountain, had no clue where we lived, drove to the fire department and said, hey, do you know where they live? And the fire department ended up directing them to us so that he could come and help. So I just want an amazing shout out to that person that literally saw a post on Facebook, had no connection to us, and drove up there just to come help. Another thing we saw was that there were people going around the neighborhood slowly over the course of the next week offering as much help as they could who had drove in or came from different places. And these aren't organizations, these are just regular people. Some people came up to our home with brand new shovels, still had the stickers on them that they clearly just went and bought, and was like, hey, do people need shovels? Do people need camping chairs just to sit down? Do people need water? Things like that. Another guy that we had, they came up to the house, and I saw him going all around the neighborhood. They had a carrier pulled on the back of their truck that was full of supplies and water and cleaning supplies they were passing out. And he had a big tank in the back of his truck, and he was filling up people's diesel for the tractors and the trackhoes and things like that, topping off their diesel so they could continue to work. So that's another person who was incredible. And then the churches have also really jumped into action, being in the Bible Belt. Multiple churches have given money to multiple people, including my parents, including my grandparents. Some of the nearby churches have done so. And then something that happened the other day was a church from a completely other town. I saw them driving around our neighborhood, and they went to every single house and basically asked, have you had home damage due to the flooding? And if you said yes, they gave you an envelope with money in it and provided some financial assistance. And we had no connection to them, didn't even know who they were. They just drove up, they could see the devastation. They said, was your home damaged? Yes, here's some money. And so thank you to them. And then my dad and our neighbor, like I said, with their machinery, tried to go around town as much as we could. We are finally starting to see some traction. There are dump trailers finally being delivered to our hometown and the surrounding areas, so that people can throw things away. People's lives were beginning to be stacked up on the side of the road. And for those people who were having to experience that, seeing everything in your home pulled out and just stacked on the side of the road and having nowhere to put it must have been traumatizing in its own right, having to go out there every day and just see it stacked there, and it stinks and smells of mud and sewage. So just getting the dump trailers to put this stuff in and get hauled off to not have to look at it anymore has to give some small amount of relief to them. And this was something that we didn't see for at least like 5 days. But that's the help that's been provided, and that's the cleanup, and it's just still a work in progress, and that's where we're at. All right, and that's kind of been our process through this whole thing. Tried to show you as much as I could, pictures and videos that we took along the way. For everyone, it's still a long way to go, whether it be cleaning up their homes, working to get whatever money they can, government assistance, FEMA, things like that, assistance from just other people, whether it be finding a new place to live, new homes, new places to stay, figuring out their financials to continue their lives and build upon it, and see what, material things were lost. Many people, like I said, lost their lives. People lost loved ones. So I just can't downplay how much the devastation was for so many. And, there are levels to it, right? There are people that just lost some things. There are people whose homes were completely destroyed. There are people who lost loved ones. So, there's levels, of course, but just across the board, everyone in this area was affected in some way. So I'm only going to provide the link down below for, my one set of people. But if you do wish to, help in any way financially, my personal recommendation is reaching out to the areas that were affected, and either trying to give to individuals, specifically people that you find out have had damage, or trying to find in certain areas where is the local hub. For example, in our hometown of Rome Mountain, it has been one of the churches. We went up there and they had just supplies, and there are people going through there constantly getting what they can. That would be somewhere that you could send financial, ways to help people, is to whatever local area for each area has become the hub, so that they can distribute that money appropriately. I personally do not recommend in this instance giving to things like the Red Cross or FEMA, just because of my personal experience with how things have been this time. I don't want to discourage in the future or anything against for people who they have helped, but just from personal experience, I believe financially giving to the hubs or to individuals would be the best way to help right now. Just personal opinion. But with that being said, that's our story so far. I'm sure I've left things out. I'm sure I've missed things. Try to describe it the best I could. Held it together the best I could. I think I did a pretty good job of that, even though it's been a very emotional time. But thanks for watching, and I hope this gave you some insight into what's happening here.